I stood at the back of the cathedral, watching my golden child sister glide down the aisle toward her billionaire groom. My parents beamed with pride, convinced they had won. But when the groom turned and saw my face, the blood drained from his cheeks. He knew exactly who I was. The envelope was thick, heavy with the weight of my entire future. I remember the exact texture of the paper, the embossed seal of Columbia University, and the way my hands shook as I tore it open. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early April. The rain was lashing against the bay windows of my parents' suburban Chicago home, but inside my chest, the sun was blinding. "I got in," I whispered to the empty hallway. Then, louder, "I got in." I ran into the kitchen, clutching the acceptance letter and the financial aid package. My parents, Richard and Margaret Harding, were sitting at the marble island. My mother was casually flipping through a high-end catalog, a half-empty glass of Chardonnay by her elbow, while my father typed away on his laptop. "Mom, Dad, look!" I slammed the letter onto the granite counter. "Columbia!" I got the acceptance for the fall semester. With the partial scholarship and the college fund, it's completely covered. My mother didn't even look up from her catalog. She just sighed, a sound that always signaled I was being too loud, too intense, or just too much. My father pushed his reading glasses down his nose and glanced at the paper. "Columbia." "Well, that's quite an achievement, Chloe," he said, his tone entirely devoid of the excitement I was practically vibrating with. He closed his laptop slowly. "Have a seat." The air in the room shifted. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I pulled out one of the heavy oak bar stools and sat down. "Chloe, we need to talk about the college fund," my mother said, finally closing her magazine. She reached out and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "You know your sister is moving to Los Angeles next month." "My sister?" "Brittany." Of course. Brittany was 2 years older than me, a former pageant queen who had spent the last 3 years finding herself while living rent-free in our parents' finished basement. Her latest ambition was to launch a luxury lifestyle brand and pursue acting. "What does Brittany moving to LA have to do with my tuition?" I asked, though the sickening dread pooling in my gut told me I already knew. My father cleared his throat. Starting a business and breaking into the entertainment industry requires significant upfront capital. Brittany has found an incredible PR agent and a prime lease for a storefront in West Hollywood. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her. "So?" My voice was trembling now. "She can get a business loan." "She's 22 with no credit history. Chloe," my mother snapped, dropping the pretense of warmth. "We've decided to reallocate the money in your college fund to serve as her seed money. It's an investment in her brand." I stared at them. The room seemed to spin. "Reallocate? You mean you're giving my college fund the money Grandma left for education to Brittany so she can play pretend in California?" "Don't be dramatic and don't be jealous," my mother scolded, her eyes narrowing. "Brittany has star quality. She has a real chance to make a name for herself. You've always been practical. You're smart. You can go to the community college down the street, live at home, and transfer to a state school later. You don't need an Ivy League degree to get a sensible desk job." The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. For 4 years, I had sacrificed everything. I hadn't gone to parties. I hadn't dated. I had worked weekend shifts at a local bakery to pay for my own SAT prep courses because they couldn't afford it, even though Brittany drove a brand new BMW. I had maintained a 4 gigapascals, joined every club, and volunteered, all with my parents' promise that if I got into a top-tier school, the fund Grandma left would be mine to use. "You promised," I choked out, tears of absolute rage burning my eyes. That money was supposed to be split, and Brittany blew her half on clothes and trips to Europe. This half was mine. "It's our money to distribute as we see fit," my father said sternly, slamming his hand on the counter. "And we have made a decision as a family." "No," I stood up, the legs of the stool scraping harshly against the tile. "You made a decision as Brittany's fan club. You're completely cutting me off from the one thing I've worked my entire life for." Just then, the door to the garage opened, and Brittany breezed in. She was carrying 3 massive shopping bags from Nordstrom, oblivious to the tension suffocating the kitchen. "Hey guys, you will not believe the shoes I just found for the launch party," she chirped, dropping the bags. She looked at my tear-stained face. "Ugh, what's her problem?" "Chloe is just having a little tantrum about her school situation," my mother said dismissively. I looked at Brittany, with her perfectly blown-out hair and her careless entitlement, and then at my parents, who looked at me like I was a burden they were tired of carrying. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't just a break, it was a fundamental severing of the ties that bound me to these people. "I'm not having a tantrum," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, icy calm. "I'm leaving." "Oh, please," Brittany rolled her eyes. "Where are you going to go? You don't even have a car." "I'll figure it out," I said. I looked directly at my father. "If I walk out that door today, I am done. Don't call me. Don't expect me at holidays. You have chosen your daughter. I guess I'll go make myself an orphan." My father scoffed. "If you walk out that door, Chloe, don't expect a single dime from us. Ever. Keep it," I told him. "You're going to need it to bail her out." I went upstairs, packed 2 suitcases with my clothes and my laptop, and left the house. I walked 3 miles in the pouring rain to the local train station. I had $400 in my checking account and a heart full of pure, unadulterated spite. The next 9 years were a masterclass in survival. I didn't go to Columbia. I couldn't afford to take on $200,000 in student loans without a cosigner. Instead, I bought a one-way bus ticket to New York City and crashed on the couch of a girl I had met in an online study forum, Samantha Jenkins. Sam lived in a cramped, drafty apartment in Queens, and for the first 6 months, I slept on a mattress so thin I could feel the floorboards against my ribs. I worked 3 jobs. I poured coffee at 5 a.m., filed papers at a temp agency from 9 to 5, and waited tables at a diner until midnight. Every single dollar I saved went into taking night classes at Baruch College. I didn't sleep. I didn't socialize. My fuel was the memory of my mother's dismissive sigh and my father's cold eyes. When I was 22, my temp agency placed me at a mid-sized corporate restructuring firm called Sterling Acquisitions. My job was supposed to be data entry, but I had a knack for numbers and an obsessive attention to detail. One evening, long after everyone else had gone home, the CEO, Arthur Sterling, found me in the break room highlighting discrepancies in a massive merger portfolio. Arthur was a tough, no-nonsense veteran of Wall Street who valued grit over pedigree. He looked at my notes, looked at me, and offered me a junior analyst position the next morning. From there, I didn't just climb the corporate ladder. I built a goddamn elevator. I learned the ruthless art of corporate takeovers, distressed debt, and private equity. By the time I was 26, I had orchestrated a merger that saved the firm millions. By 28, Arthur made me a junior partner. I had transformed. The quiet, desperate girl in the rainy kitchen was dead. In her place was Chloe Harding, a sharp-suited, uncompromising executive who lived in a penthouse in Manhattan and had a bank account that dwarfed the measly $150,000 college fund my parents had stolen from me. I kept tabs on my family through the grapevine. It was exactly as I had predicted. Brittany's lifestyle brand crashed and burned within 2 years. She blew through my college fund on lavish parties and designer clothes, eventually moving back into my parents' basement. My parents had to remortgage their house twice to cover the debts she had racked up in their name. They had reached out to me once, 5 years in, asking for a small loan to help your sister get back on her feet. I had forwarded their email directly to my spam folder. Then, a month after my 27th birthday, I became the lead partner on a massive portfolio acquisition. We were buying up the distressed debt of several legacy companies that had been mismanaged into the ground. One of the largest accounts in that portfolio was a company called Preston Dynamics, a commercial real estate and hotel conglomerate that was hemorrhaging money. The CEO of Preston Dynamics was a man named David Preston. From the outside, the Preston family was high society, old money, dripping with prestige. From the inside my side of the spreadsheet, they were functionally bankrupt. David had taken over the company from his father and driven it into the dirt through reckless expansion. For the past 3 months, David Preston had been calling my office relentlessly, begging for a meeting to restructure his debt. He was entirely at my mercy. If I called in the loans, his family's empire would collapse overnight, their hotels foreclosed, their legacy wiped out. I had been making him sweat, refusing his calls, letting his panic marinate. And then, the heavy, gold foil envelope arrived at my penthouse. My assistant handed it to me with the morning mail. The return address was my parents' house in Chicago. I slid a letter opener under the seal and pulled out the thick, cream-colored cardstock. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Harding joyfully invite you to the wedding of their daughter, Brittany Ann Harding, to Mr. David Preston. I stared at the name. David Preston. I burst out laughing. The sound echoed in my empty, sprawling office. It was too perfect. It was almost poetic. Brittany, desperate to maintain her illusion of wealth and status, had managed to sink her claws into David Preston, the heir to the Preston Empire. My parents were probably weeping with joy, convinced that their golden child had finally landed a billionaire who would save them all from the financial ruin she had caused. They had no idea that David Preston's billions were entirely an illusion. And they certainly had no idea that the person holding the executioner's axe over the Preston family fortune was the daughter they had thrown away. A smaller note fell out of the envelope. It was handwritten by my mother. Chloe, we know it's been a long time, but your sister is marrying into one of the most prominent families in the country. We are flying everyone out to the Hamptons for the ceremony. It would be a shame for you to miss seeing how wonderfully Brittany's life has turned out. Don't feel pressured to buy an expensive gift. We know things might be tight for you. Mom, things might be tight for me. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. I picked up my phone and pressed the intercom button for my assistant. Sarah, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Please RSVP to the Harding Preston wedding, one guest, and draft an email to David Preston's office. Tell him the senior partner at Sterling Acquisitions will finally grant him an in-person meeting regarding his debt restructuring. Tell him I'll meet him at his wedding. The drive to the Hamptons took just over 2 hours, but for me, it felt like a 9-year journey coming to its final, devastating conclusion. I sat in the back of my chauffeured Maybach, the tinted windows shielding me from the glaring July sun. My assistant, Sarah, had briefed me on the latest financials for Preston Dynamics before I left the city. David Preston has called our office 6 times this morning, Miss Harding, Sarah had told me over the phone, her voice completely devoid of pity. He's practically in tears. He says if we don't grant a forbearance on the mezzanine loan by Monday, his board is going to vote to liquidate the hospitality division. Let him sweat, Sarah, I had replied, adjusting the cuffs of my silk blouse. Send an automated out-of-office reply. Tell him the senior partner is attending a family function and will address the liquidation on Monday. Now, as the Maybach pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Ocean Pearl Estate, a sprawling, obscenely ostentatious property overlooking the Atlantic, I felt a cold, hard knot of anticipation form in my chest. The estate was buzzing with the kind of frantic energy that only comes from people desperately trying to prove they belong to a class they cannot afford. Valets were sprinting across the circular crushed gravel driveway, parking a parade of leased Porsches and Mercedes-Benzes. I stepped out of my car, my driver, Thomas, holding the door for me. I was wearing a custom, charcoal gray Tom Ford suit. It was sharp, feminine, and terrifyingly expensive, the kind of outfit that screamed power to anyone who knew fashion, but looked like a simple, understated business suit to those who didn't. I hadn't dressed for a wedding. I had dressed for an acquisition. I found my mother, Margaret, near the sweeping grand staircase in the foyer, barking orders at a terrified floral arranger. When she turned and saw me, her fake, camera-ready smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "Chloe," she said, her eyes doing a rapid, judgmental scan of my outfit. "You actually came, and you wore a suit to a summer wedding. How wonderfully practical of you." "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice perfectly even. "It's been a while." "Yes, well, we've all been very busy," she deflected, waving a dismissive hand. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me. David's family is old money. They are practically royalty in New York real estate. Do not talk about your little clerical job, do not complain about money, and for heaven's sake, try to blend in. Your sister has worked very hard to secure this future. Secure this future. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Before I could respond, a shrill voice echoed from the top of the stairs. Mom! The makeup artist used the wrong setting spray. I look like a glazed donut. Brittany stomped down the stairs. She was swallowed by a massive, sparkling Vera Wang gown that looked like it cost more than the house she grew up in. When she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks. You're here, Brittany said, her nose wrinkling slightly as if she had smelled something sour. I told Mom not to invite you, but she said it would look bad to David's family if my only sister boycotted the wedding. Congratulations, Brittany, I said, offering a tight, bloodless smile. You look exactly as I expected. She took it as a compliment, flipping her hair over her bare shoulder. Thanks. I know you probably couldn't afford a nice dress, but you could have at least tried to look less corporate. David's friends are all venture capitalists and heirs. You're going to stick out like a sore thumb. I think I'll manage, I replied. My father, Richard, emerged from a nearby sitting room, adjusting a tuxedo that was clearly a rental. He looked older, tired, the weight of his secret financial ruin hanging heavy on his shoulders. He gave me a stiff nod. Chloe, good of you to show up. There's an open bar, but try not to overdo it. We're paying by the head, and God knows this whole affair has cost a small fortune. He had no idea. He had no idea that the billionaire son-in-law he was banking on to save his miserable, debt-ridden life was currently staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy. David Preston was marrying Brittany because she had spent the last 2 years parading around high society with my stolen college fund and a mountain of credit card debt, pretending to be a wealthy heiress. It was a brilliant, tragic collision of two magnificent frauds. David thought he was marrying into a family with liquid capital who could bail out his failing hotels. Brittany and my parents thought they were marrying into endless, untouchable wealth. Neither of them knew that the only actual billionaire in the room was the woman in the charcoal suit they had thrown away 9 years ago. I'll find my seat, I said, turning away from the people who shared my blood. I wouldn't want to miss the show. The ceremony was held on the sprawling back lawn, facing the ocean. A string quartet played a melancholic, sweeping rendition of a classical piece as the guests took their seats. The bride's side was packed with my parents' friends from Chicago, most of whom looked deeply uncomfortable in the humid, salty air. The groom's side was sparsely populated by stiff, unsmiling men in bespoke suits and women dripping in diamonds. I ignored the usher who tried to guide me to the third row on the bride's side, right behind Aunt Carol and Uncle Robert. Instead, I walked straight to the back row, taking a seat on the aisle, dead center. I wanted a perfect view. The music swelled. The groomsmen marched out, followed by David Preston. I had only ever seen David over secure video conferences, where he usually sat behind a massive mahogany desk, sweating profusely as I systematically tore apart his company's balance sheets. Seeing him in person, he looked surprisingly small. He was handsome in a weak, overly groomed sort of way, but there were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were trembling as he clasped them in front of him. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, not the altar. Then, everyone stood. The wedding march began. Brittany flowed down the aisle on my father's arm. My father looked so deeply proud, so incredibly relieved. He thought this was his salvation. Brittany reached the altar. She handed her massive bouquet to her maid of honor and took David's hands. The officiant, a regal-looking man with a booming voice, began the proceedings. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of David William Preston and Brittany Ann Harding. As the officiant droned on about love, sacrifice, and building a foundation, David's gaze began to wander. He looked out over the crowd, pasting on a nervous, tight smile for his mother in the front row. Then, his eyes drifted toward the back. He was scanning the crowd, probably looking for an escape route, when his eyes locked onto mine. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just sat there, my legs crossed, my posture perfectly straight, staring back at him with the cold, calculating eyes. Harding, senior partner at Sterling Acquisitions, the woman who owned his debt, the woman who held the deed to his legacy in a manila folder in her Manhattan penthouse. I watched in real time as the human body reacted to pure, unadulterated terror. David's face didn't just go pale, it turned the color of ash. His mouth fell open slightly. He blinked, hard, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked away, looked back at his bride, and then his eyes snapped back to me, wide and frantic. He recognized me. I had kept my camera off for the first few months of our negotiations, but 3 weeks ago, during a particularly brutal boardroom showdown over a defaulted loan, I had finally met him face to face. I had told him, in no uncertain terms, that Preston Dynamics was living on borrowed time. Now, he was putting the pieces together. Harding, Brittany Harding. His knees visibly buckled. The officiant paused. "David? Are you quite all right, son?" "I need some water," David gasped, his voice cracking. He was sweating through his bespoke tuxedo shirt. Brittany let out an embarrassed little laugh, squeezing his hands. "He's just overwhelmed, aren't you, baby? The heat is a lot." "Yes," David choked out. He couldn't stop looking at me. Every time he tried to focus on Brittany, his eyes darted back to the back row, terrified that I was going to stand up and object. I didn't need to. I already held all the cards. He stumbled through his vows like a man reciting a hostage script. When it was time to say "I do," his voice was barely a whisper. They kissed, but it was awkward, desperate, and entirely devoid of romance. As they walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, David looked like he was marching to his own funeral. When he passed my row, I tilted my head ever so slightly. The reception was held in a massive, air-conditioned tent dripping with crystal chandeliers. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and stood near the edge of the dance floor, watching the facade crumble. My parents were mingling furiously, trying to network with David's wealthy relatives. I watched my father corner a man I recognized as a prominent hedge fund manager, laughing a little too loudly. About an hour into the reception, just before dinner was served, I saw David break away from Brittany. He was pacing near the exit of the tent, holding a phone to his ear, looking absolutely frantic. He hung up, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. I placed my glass on a passing waiter's tray and walked over to him. "Lovely ceremony, David," I said, my voice low and smooth. He jumped as if I had hit him with a live wire. He spun around, his eyes wild. "Miss Harding, what are you doing here? Did Arthur send you? Are you legally allowed to confront me at my wedding? This constitutes harassment." "Arthur didn't send me," I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "And this isn't a corporate confrontation. I'm a guest. I'm family, actually." David stared at me, his brain completely short-circuiting. "Family? Brittany is my sister," I said simply, "though we aren't particularly close." The silence that stretched between us was deafening. I could see the exact moment the devastating reality crashed down on him. "Your sister," David whispered, the horror creeping into his voice. "But Brittany's family is wealthy. They're prominent investors in Chicago," Brittany told me. "Brittany told you what she needed to tell you to get a ring on her finger," I corrected him gently. "My parents are drowning in debt, David. They remortgaged their home to pay for this wedding. They are entirely tapped out. They think you are going to save them." David backed up, hitting a floral pedestal, sending a vase of white roses wobbling. "No, that's impossible," my advisor said. "The optics. I need an infusion of capital by Monday, or the board is locking me out." "I know," I said. "I'm the one writing the lockout order." "Chloe, what on earth are you doing?" I turned. My mother was marching toward us, her face flushed with anger, followed closely by my father and Brittany. They had seen me cornering their golden goose and had rushed over to protect their investment. "David, darling, I am so sorry," my mother gushed, stepping between us and glaring at me. "I don't know what Chloe is bothering you about. She's always been very jealous of Brittany. Please don't let her ruin your special day with her bitterness." David looked from my mother to my father, to his new bride, and finally back to me. His chest was heaving. "Jealous? David repeated, his voice hollow, breaking into a hysterical, breathless laugh. He looked at my father. "You don't know who she is, do you?" "She's my sister," Brittany snapped, rolling her eyes. "She's a data entry clerk or something in New York. David, let's go cut the cake. Ignore her." "She's not a clerk," David yelled, the sudden volume shocking my family into silence. The music in the tent seemed to fade into the background. Several guests nearby turned to stare. David pointed a shaking finger at me. "That is C. Harding. She is the senior partner at Sterling Acquisitions. She bought my company's distressed debt 3 months ago." He looked at my father, his eyes welling with tears of absolute despair. "She owns Preston Dynamics, and as of Monday morning, she is foreclosing on everything I have." The silence that fell over our little corner of the reception tent was absolute. It was the kind of profound, suffocating quiet that only exists in the split second before a devastating car crash. The string quartet was still playing a lively Mozart piece on the other side of the dance floor, but right here, among the orchids and the crystal champagne flutes, the air had turned to ice. My mother, Margaret, was the first to try and shatter the reality. She let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, waving her hand as if she could physically swat David's words out of the air. "David, sweetheart, you must be confused," she stammered, her meticulously applied blush suddenly looking stark against her pale skin. "Chloe is not a senior partner. She's an assistant. She doesn't own any companies. Look at her. She's just trying to cause a scene because she's always been jealous of Brittany's success." David didn't even look at my mother. He kept his terrified, unblinking gaze locked on me. "Confused? Margaret, I have been staring at her signature on default notices for 3 weeks. I sat in a Zoom call with her last Thursday while she calmly explained how she was going to dismantle my grandfather's hospitality group and sell it for parts to a private equity firm in Dubai. She's the Grim Reaper of Wall Street." "Dubai?" my father whispered. The glass of scotch in his hand tilted, amber liquid spilling onto his rented tuxedo pants. He didn't seem to notice. "David, what do you mean? Default notices? Your family owns half of Manhattan real estate." "My family owns a mountain of toxic debt," David finally snapped, his voice cracking with hysteria. The pristine facade of the high society air shattered completely. He turned on my father, his eyes wild. "We are leveraged to the hilt. The Preston Tower? Mortgaged. The Miami beachfront properties? Bleeding cash. I came to this wedding praying that the liquid capital you promised me from your Chicago investments would float my mezzanine loan until the end of the quarter." Now it was Brittany's turn to freeze. She had been standing there, her jaw slightly slack, trying to process the rapid-fire financial jargon. But the words toxic debt and bleeding cash translated perfectly into her language. "Wait, David," Brittany said, her voice trembling. She reached out and grabbed his lapels, her manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric. "What do you mean you need my dad's capital? You told me your trust fund unlocked when you turned 30. What about the seed money for my new boutique in Soho? What about the townhouse in the Hamptons you promised we were buying?" David looked at his new bride, the woman he had just sworn his life to, and the realization of her true financial state washed over him like a bucket of dirty water. "Boutique?" David choked out. "Townhouse? Brittany, my personal accounts were frozen on Tuesday. The only reason this wedding even happened is because the vendors were paid in advance. I married you because your father implicitly guaranteed a 7-figure cash injection into Preston Dynamics as a wedding gift." "7 figures?" my father roared, drawing the stares of a dozen wealthy guests at the adjacent tables. "I don't have 7 figures. I had to take out a 3rd mortgage on the house just to pay for the floral arrangements and the caterer for this damn wedding. We are completely tapped out." "I thought you were going to pay off Brittany's credit card debt." It was a masterpiece. A breathtaking, symmetrical tragedy. 2 parasites who had attached themselves to each other, both convinced the other was a viable host, only to realize they were both starving to death. Brittany let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She stumbled backward, tripping over the massive train of her Vera Wang gown. "You're broke?" she shrieked at David. "You're a fake? I married a bankrupt loser?" "You're one to talk," David fired back, his face turning purple. "You've been wearing rented jewelry and parading around my country club pretending to be a socialite, while your parents are taking out third mortgages to buy your salmon puffs. You're a fraud, Brittany. Stop it. Both of you. Stop it right now." My mother hissed, looking around frantically at the wealthy guests who were now blatantly eavesdropping. The facade of the perfect family, the illusion she had sacrificed my entire future to build, was burning to the ground in front of a live audience. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a desperate, venomous pleading. "Chloe, Chloe, please, tell me this is a joke. Tell me you aren't actually doing this to your sister. We are your family." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The bubbles popped against my tongue, crisp and cold. "Family," I repeated, tasting the word. "That's a funny word for you to use, Margaret, because the last time we had a conversation about money, you told me I was being dramatic. You told me my college fund, the money I worked my entire life to earn, was an investment in Brittany's brand." I stepped closer to them, the heel of my Louboutins sinking slightly into the manicured grass beneath the tent. "Well, consider this my investment strategy," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal murmur. "I invested in myself. I built an empire out of the scraps you left me. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., my firm is calling in the $140 million loan on Preston Dynamics. We are seizing the assets, we are liquidating the hospitality division, and we are foreclosing on every property David's family owns." "You can't do this," my father yelled, stepping toward me with his fists clenched. "I'll sue you. I'll report you to the SEC." "For what, Richard? Doing my job?" I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. David signed the default clauses. His legal counsel, attorney Michael Stamford, reviewed every single page. "It's ironclad. It's strictly business." I looked at Brittany, who was now sitting on a white Chiavari chair, weeping hysterically into her hands, her mascara running down her face in thick black rivers. Then I looked at David, who looked like he was about to physically vomit onto the dance floor. "It sounds like you all have a lot of accounting to do," I said, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "I won't keep you from your cake cutting. Enjoy the reception. It's the last party any of you will be able to afford for a very, very long time." I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the tent. The cool ocean breeze hit my face, carrying away the suffocating scent of lilies and panic. As I walked back down the crushed gravel driveway toward my waiting Maybach, I could hear the muffled, frantic shouting erupting from the tent behind me. The aftermath was swifter and more brutal than even I had anticipated. At 9:01 a.m. on Monday, Sterling Acquisitions officially initiated the hostile takeover of Preston Dynamics. Judge Harrison Bradley at the Southern District Bankruptcy Court signed off on the asset seizure by Wednesday. David's family lost everything: the hotels, the commercial buildings, the legacy. David was ousted as CEO and escorted out of his own building by security. Brittany, realizing her billionaire was a beggar, immediately filed for an annulment. But because they had consummated the marriage and she had signed a prenuptial agreement that David's lawyers had specifically drafted to protect him from predatory spouses, the legal battle dragged her directly into his bankruptcy proceedings. The courts dug into her finances, exposing her massive credit card debt and the fraudulent loans my parents had taken out in her name. Within 6 months, the bank foreclosed on my parents' suburban Chicago home. The third mortgage had been the final nail in the coffin. They were forced to declare bankruptcy themselves, auctioning off my mother's jewelry and my father's car just to pay their legal fees. They ended up moving into a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a dreary suburb of Milwaukee, far away from the country clubs and the high society friends who had immediately abandoned them. Brittany moved in with them. With no money, no skills, and a permanently ruined credit score, her days of playing a luxury lifestyle influencer were over. She got a job working the cosmetics counter at a mid-tier department store, wearing a polyester uniform instead of Vera Wang. They tried to call me, of course. My office received dozens of voicemails from my father, begging for a loan, pleading for forgiveness, crying that they were living on ramen noodles. My mother sent long, handwritten letters to my penthouse, talking about forgiveness and family bonds. I never answered a single one. I had learned my lesson 9 years ago in that rainy kitchen. When people show you exactly who they are and exactly what you are worth to them, you believe them. They had placed their bets on the golden child, and they had lost everything. Me? I made senior partner by 30. I bought a house in the Hamptons 3 doors down from where David's family estate used to be, and I pay in cash. Every time I look out at the ocean, I don't feel anger. I don't feel spite. I just feel the quiet, beautiful peace of a ledger that has finally been perfectly balanced.